and welcome to the third IPQ debate on how to revive the Franco-German relationship. I'm Henning, Hoff, Executive Editor of Internationale Politik Quarterly. Today, we want to dive deeper in our summer issue on Franco-German relations, which we published back in late June, a couple of days before the first round of French parliamentary snap elections. I'll post the link in the chat in a moment. And to do that, I have the pleasure of welcoming two contributors from the summer issue. We have with us Gesine Weber, a fellow with the German Marshall Fund's Geostrategy team based in Paris. Hello, Gesine. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. And we also have with us Jakob Ross, Research Fellow for France and Franco-German Relations here at the German Council on Foreign Relations, our publisher. Hi, Jakob. Both are presently in Paris. Much has happened since we published the summer issue, but nothing much has changed between France and Germany, which, or so we say on the cover, enjoy a somewhat fractured relationship these days. There are many reasons for this. One is that Russia's war against Ukraine seemed to have deepened some differences rather than narrowed them. And with Emmanuel Macron and Olaf Scholz, France and Germany are currently led by politicians with very different styles and outlooks. But there are also underlying trends which go far beyond personalities. The narrative of post-war reconciliation is losing its cachet with younger generations. Interest in what is happening in the other country is waning, polls are showing, and the party political spectra have continued to diverge dramatically. So today, with Gesine and Jakob, we want to try and take the temperature, or maybe the heartbeat, of the Franco-German relationship and explore whether some of the fractures can actually be healed, or in other words, how can we get that Franco-German engine going again? This time we want to jump directly into the debate, starting off with myself putting questions to our contributors. After some discussion, we'll be opening up for your questions and comments. To join the debate, please raise your virtual hand and I'll invite you to pose your question and comment in person. You're also welcome to use the chat function and I'll do my very best to put your points to the panel. Please note that this event is being recorded and will be published subsequently. And now, without further ado, let's start with some stock taking and scene setting. Where do we stand politically in Paris and Berlin? Gesine, France, I believe, is still enjoying this post-Olympic glow, but politics have started to return. We have seen inconclusive parliamentary elections, and the country only has a caretaker government at present until the next one is formed, which looks like a very difficult process. When do you expect President Macron will announce a new prime minister?
Well, I think that is the 100 million euro question here that we are asking all of us in a phase what I would maybe call an in-between Olympic not so much glow, because it feels indeed pretty much like an in-between here. And this in-between has been going on now since early July, since we have seen the results of the elections. But things might finally start to move a bit next weekend, because Macron is going to meet with the heads of the parties over the weekend. So, of course, the major objective of these talks is to form a majority, or basically to find out which parties could potentially agree on what candidate to then govern the country or to lead a government. Normally, the talks are supposed to end by Monday. That doesn't mean that they will come up with a selection or with a result. But if this was the case, which I think I wouldn't be too optimistic about that, to be honest, then we might maybe see the announcement of next prime minister as early as, let's say, next Wednesday. Or the other scenario is that the talks are going to go into another round, and then this entire situation will continue to endure. But I think it is, in any case, safe to say that this forming a majority is a really, really complicated process, because the current candidate from the left bloc, Lucie Castet, is actually someone that Macron does not want to nominate or basically name as a prime minister. And I also recall that he's not required to do so by the constitution, because nothing in the French constitution forces the president to nominate the person or basically the nominee from the party which has most seats in the parliament, which is a big difference to Germany, where in general the chancellor comes from the party that gained the majority. So at the moment, I would say at best next Wednesday, but I wouldn't bet on that.
Thank you very much. And Jakob, sort of what kind of government do you expect to emerge from this process?
Hello, everybody. Good to be back after the summer break. Maybe before answering that, Henning, just two very quick points, which I think are important for this transitioning phase at the moment here in Paris. The first one being, as you alluded to in the introduction, Henning, that Macron maintains his position and did so over the past weeks, that nobody won the election, which is highly challenged, as you would expect from the left, who won this election by any good measurement. And the second fact, just yesterday, we saw a new polling on what the French actually think or hope for in the Prime Minister's office. And actually the acting Prime Minister, Gabriel Attal, remains the favorite candidate of the French. So I think that even though you might get the impression that politicians are getting increasingly nervous to have a new government formed, the French really still seem to be in a kind of vacation mood and not too pressed actually to have change in Matignon in the Prime Minister's office. Now, to your question, what this new next government might look like, I think, well, it's key, as Gesine just said, that Macron refuses the candidate that the Popular Front on the left came up with throughout these past weeks, Lucie Castet. Macron thinks that she's unable to form a government that could be stable, that would survive the first weeks in parliament. He thinks that she would be voted out and her government would be voted out very rapidly. She's not a politician. She's a bureaucrat, a high-ranking official in the Paris administration. She's director of finances, which might be a good qualification, but we can get back to this later, because there's a big vote on the budget for 2025 coming up, which is kind of the biggest urgency for the next incoming government. I think there's, as Gesine also said, two main scenarios. Either the left imposes Castes and Macron accepts this fate and they try it and give her chance, so to say, or Macron succeeds in dividing the left and building what he would like to have a kind of grand coalition spanning from the center-left socialists with his party to the center-right Républicains. But it's very hard to tell, again, what will be the result of the talks tomorrow with some of these party presidents, and then next week when Macron will talk to Marine Le Pen and Éric Ciotti. They are still on vacation, so again, this might take a little more time.
Thank you very much. I mean, this idea of having this grand coalition, in a way, the Macron coalition, sort of reaching from the center left to the center right, and having sort of extending it because his own party is not strong enough anymore to actually to have the numbers. Is that, Gesine, in your view, realistic, or would you expect a rather short-lived experiment with probably a left-leaning candidate in the first instance?
I think this idea of having a grand coalition or kind of a Macron-forced coalition is, of course, Macron's preferred scenario, because I have the impression that that was a bit what he has been gambling on since the second round of the elections, or even actually after the results of the first round we're in. So this narrative that he's going to be the one who is bringing together the Republican forces of France, from which he tends to exclude the far left, LFI, and of course also the far right, Rassemblement National. That's really his narrative. And I think that is what he's gambling on. But I'm really not convinced that this is going to happen, because it implies that we would have to split the socialists and the Greens, which currently are still teaming up with the left in the left bloc, the Nouveau Front Populaire, from this Bizet bloc. And I mean, they also still have, I would say, an interest to have kind of a left majority and maybe not pull out of this bloc. So I think it will be very tricky for him. And even if there was kind of a government of what Macron calls the Republican forces, this government would also have to rely on forces from the center-right, les Républicains. And I think there are some issues where the Républicains and forces from the left just fundamentally disagree. For example, on all questions that are related to identity discourse and immigration and like how you basically see French society. And I think that also when it comes to questions like budget and social expenses and so on, that at one point, one of the forces might just quit. But I think it's also important to bear in mind that Macron basically now has to deal with the composition of the National Assembly as it is until next June, because according to the French constitution, you're only allowed to do a dissolution of the French National Assembly once a year.
And maybe Henning, just very rapidly, if I may add to what Gesine just said on the gambling on the part of Macron, I would strongly agree, because Macron, other than Lucie Castès, he has introduced a couple of left-leaning names for the Prime Minister's office throughout these past days. Bernard Cazeneuve, who was Prime Minister under President François Hollande, so socialist president, who has a reputation of being closer to En Marche, so Macron's movement, and very critical of the extreme left, La France Insoumise. And also these past days, the mayor of Saint-Ouen, a commune in the north of Paris, Karim Bouamran, who again is a socialist figure who's hugely popular, who gained a lot of attention throughout the Olympic Games, who has Moroccan origins, so a successful migration story in France, and which is, I think, the most important point for Macron, is hugely critical again of the far left. So Macron is really playing a divide and conquer game and tries to get the socialists out of this larger left coalition.
Thank you very much. I wanted to ask you sort of how important is it if we now move it to the Franco-German relationship in the first place, because the French president, of course, in the French system has this sort of large say on all questions, sort of referring to foreign and, of course, also European policy. Is sort of in how far does the fact that we have only a caretaker government might take a long time to actually have a government, which again is then quite unstable. How does it affect Franco-German relations?
Well, I mean, it's safe to say that it won't get easier in the coming months, I think. I mean, I tend to be rather pessimistic on this compared to others, but I think that these past months or even years, ever since the war in Ukraine started, basically, and the new coalition government in Germany took over, Franco-German relations have been quite tumultuous and difficult. And I don't see why this should suddenly change in a situation where Emmanuel Macron will necessarily be very occupied with interior policy, with a potential cohabitation, so dealing with a prime minister that is opposed to many of his policies. Again, a big budget conflict coming up in autumn. There's no agreement whatsoever between political forces in France on how to deal with the sovereign debt issue. They are in a procedure with the European Commission. They have to report to the Commission in September on how they want to cut expenses. When the left coalition that actually won the elections by presenting a program that would necessitate a lot of spending, actually, in terms of social policies, infrastructure policies. So I think there's a lot of conflict coming up in French interior politics that Macron will be drawn into, even though he's the president and he could, as you suggested, play this card of being the representative of France on the outside, in Brussels, on the international stage. So yes, I think it will have a huge impact. Maybe a last point on this, there's also conflict brewing within Macron's camp. I think this will continue to grow as the end of his second term is coming nearer. His former Prime Minister, Edouard Philippe, who has in the meantime built his own party, is increasingly taking his distance from Macron. Gabriel Attal, who is the acting Prime Minister still, is set to have a worsened relationship to Macron. He was excluded from several meetings throughout the summer, including on the Olympics. So he's really not happy. But at the same time, he tries to prepare Macron's heritage. So I think all of these interior dynamics will certainly have an impact on the Franco-German relationship. And then going into 2025, once we passed the regional elections in Eastern Germany, the German government will be very much occupied with preparing the federal elections in September, but we might come back to this, I guess.
Maybe
I just wanted to ask Gesine quickly, sort of whether you share this pessimism, or do you see any chance of something going to happen between the two countries in the coming 12 months?
Well, normally I'm a bit more on the optimistic side, but I have to say that on that issue here, I agree with Jakob. So I don't really see a lot of positive potential if things, like at least until November, I don't see things moving on in either direction. So pretty much expect stagnation, because I think that it is not only the question of Macron's political energy being focused on domestic politics and the French political class being most likely a bit more inward looking. I think it is also the question of the issue of trust and the reliability of France as a partner that has really caused, I would say, to some extent, a shock moment in Germany in summer, when there was really the trajectory that there might be potentially a far-right government. And this idea that there is still, I mean, we should not forget that the Rassemblement National actually won the popular votes. So they won most votes in the elections, but due to the electoral system, they did not get most seats. But this idea that one of the critical pillars of German foreign policy, namely the relationship with France, is to some extent threatened by that scenario. Maybe not today, but certainly if there was another dissolution, or also by the 2027 presidential elections in France, I think is taking a lot of political impetus and political energy, and also political potential out of the relationship at the moment.
But shouldn't it be, sorry to interrupt you, but shouldn't it be just the opposite? I mean, if your closest partner is sort of is on the cusp of going far right, and probably sort of then the whole relationship goes up in flames, wouldn't you expect that the reaction should be just the other way around, and sort of, rather than saying, oh, we have to distance ourselves and have to closely observe what's going on, wouldn't it make more sense to engage?
Well, I mean, as someone who is personally deeply convinced of the importance of the Franco-German relationship, I would definitely say yes, that should be the case, because it could also help you to think about policies, particularly on the EU level, that in the end benefit citizens, right? But in the end, from a bit more, I would say, realistic perspective, you could also argue maybe it's a hedging strategy to not put all your eggs in one basket, because we have seen that in general, German foreign policy has been pretty good in putting, so let's say, the eggs of German foreign policy in the partnerships basket, namely the partnership with France and the partnership with the US. And the scenario of having, let's say, a Trump scenario in the US and a Le Pen scenario in France is pretty much the worst scenario for German foreign policy, which also brings me back to one point about Franco-German cooperation that I wanted to make. I think we should not underestimate the US variable in this context, because even though at the moment all attention is on Kamala Harris and Walz and the Democratic side basically speeding up again, we should not underestimate the voter potential for Trump in the United States. And if there was another Trump administration, I think that will push France and Germany together to come up with a solution for the most pressing problems of Europe that Europe today has, namely on European security and defense. Whether they want or not, we have seen that crisis in general push the Franco-German couple together, be it COVID, be it the war of Russia against Ukraine. Even though it looks like a muddle through sometimes, in the end, they come up with a solution. And a Trump moment might force them to do that again.
Jakob, do you share this? And maybe we can talk a moment about the situation in Berlin, where the government once more is a little shaky looking, coming out of the summer recess with the finance minister and the economy minister sort of trading blows and excluding each other from any future government. It is also sort of on the German side. Do you see also this reaction which Gesine has just spoken about this sort of rather leaning back than leaning forward, and the American angle? Do you share this sort of the Trump scenario would actually sort of revive the Franco-German relationship? Is that something you also see?
Yes, I mean it's certainly a little provocative or controversial to put it that way, but I think we have decent evidence from the first term of Trump after 2016 that this was the case. So yes, I would agree with Gesine. I remember vividly, and at the time, other people wrote in Internationale Politik as well. That after Chancellor Merkel came back from her first meeting with President Trump in May 2017, I think, and she gave this very famous Bierzelt speech, the beer tent speech in Bavaria, when she stated that going forward, Europeans would not be able or should not rely on the US, or she said our partners, but she meant the US as they did in the past. And this came just weeks after Macron had been elected in France. And I mean, the French were jubilating really, because this opened a historic window of opportunity to advance a more French view on how European security, European defense should look like. And we saw a lot of progress with regards to this field. You had big industrial projects signed, the main ground combat system and the future combat air system being signed in 2017. You had the Aachen Treaty, so a new bilateral treaty with a very important dimension on European security and defense being signed in January 2019. And what the French feel like today, I mean, that's my personal impression, we could discuss this, is that in the context and against the backdrop of the Russian aggression against Ukraine, the current German government with Chancellor Scholz completely fell back to this traditional transatlantic position of operating very closely to the White House, always discussing with Biden first before making any important decisions, including on Ukraine. And I mean, the French accept that. They are realistic enough to see that Europe needs NATO, Europe needs the US. Europe can't do it on its own for now. But I don't think that the French have given up on this historic willingness to strengthen European sovereignty, strategic autonomy, and all of that. I don't think that Macron gave up on this, even though at the moment, agreed, they are very much moving into this NATO and a Western direction as well. So yes, I think, and I actually agree with what Gesine said, that up until November, at least we could expect a kind of status quo, because nobody wants to move too much before the US elections. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Before we open to questions, and there's a first hand up, I just wanted to give both contributors to really shortly comment on the articles and the issue. Gesine wrote a piece together with Mathieu Durand, basically arguing that even if we have a weakened Franco-German engine, it still can power Europe. And sort of how do you see this happening, and sort of what is the number one piece on the agenda? You already alluded to defense.
Yeah, so in the article, we basically make the argument that we think that Franco-German leadership, particularly in the EU, is not, there is no alternative to that. Simply not only because these are the two biggest EU member states, but also because the opinions of France, or the positions of France and Germany, are often so diametrically opposed that when they manage to find a compromise, or if they manage to find a compromise, that it is often easy to bring other member states on board, because they would often be somewhere in the middle between France and Germany. And if you strike a compromise between the two of them, you can work with the other states to bring them on board. So that is a bit the baseline assumption. However, particularly when they're domestically weakened, this idea that you have a Franco-German leadership couple that is just basically marching in front of everyone and everyone else is following, doesn't hold anymore, even more so as we have seen that leadership in the European Union has become much more diverse. So first we have seen, for example, the European institutions that are taking a much more important role, particularly when it comes to things like industrial policy, but also, for example, in security and defense, through a very creative use of the tools that fall into EU exclusive competence. And then we also see other players becoming more vocal in the European Union, be it Poland or Italy. And outside the European Union, we now also have a Labour government that is definitely pro-European and wants to engage more with Europeans. So our claim is that a Franco-German engine can still power Europe, but it has to enlarge, has to become more diverse, and really has to make others part of a broader leadership team, if you want to put it like that. And in terms of issues, you already alluded to that, Henning. The top issue is going to be European sovereignty and European strategic autonomy, call it how you want it, but basically the idea to define European interests and then the strategies that lead to achieving these interests should start with resolute support to Ukraine and strengthening European defense.
Thank you very much for this concise comments on what you wrote back in June. And last question before we open up to Jakob, also on your article, you're making the case that the Franco-German relationship needs to be renewed by including European goals. So what do you think are the most important of those, and how can that be done?
Yeah, very rapidly, and at the risk of repeating what Gesine just said, I think that defense is absolutely key for pro-European younger people, both in France and in Germany, to demonstrate that the European Union and Europe is capable of defending its citizens on its own. Maybe not tomorrow, maybe not in 5 years, but that has to be the goal, and people have to work towards this goal. And I think that France and Germany, I mean, I'm optimistic on this because I think that France and Germany really can learn a lot from each other with regards to this goal. If you look at Germany's Zeitenwende, the Bundeswehr's ambition to become the most capable conventional force in Mitteleuropa within a NATO framework, that's great. I think it's a good thing, and I think that the Bundeswehr is willing to fill this role. But a lot of partners, including the US, not only France, are in distrust with regards to the German capacity to build a capable fighting force, not only political commitments with the brigade to Lithuania, but really to have a system that would permit the Bundeswehr in a scenario of war to be a capable fighting force. The French have this. I think they have this trust with allies, and that's why they shift resources to the eastern flank as well. But the French lack another resource, which is trust to political decision-making, just because France has been so keen to operate on a sovereign level as a nation state, very critical of NATO military command in the past. So the French have a lot of catch up to do with regards to what Gesine referred to, coalitions and multilateral mechanisms, be it NATO or within the European Union. So I think there's a lot of potential if Germany and France, or the two governments, the two militaries, are willing to engage in this kind of dialogue, to learn from the other, to use the other to gain trust or gain warfighting capability, then I think there's a good potential for the Franco-German relationship going forward.
Thank you very much. And with that, I would like to open the debate. There is Hans-Jochen Schmidt, who is already has his hand up. But if there are others also who want to come in, you're most welcome.
So let's go to Hans-Joachim Schmidt, please.
Thanks a lot. First of all,
sorry.
Thanks. No, it's okay. Thanks a lot. First of all, for having organized this discussion today. I would like to refer to the last comments made by Gesine Weber and by Jakob Röss concerning defense. Regardless the outcome of the US elections, I think the Europeans will be forced to dedicate more efforts and more energy on coming out with kind of European strategy, how to get organized defense. The problem from my point of view is that France very often overestimates its potential, forgets that it is not anymore la grande nation, has not anymore, from my point of view, the budgetary means to beef up what they are looking for. And the Germans, unfortunately, since the Zeitenwende, they didn't come out, how do you say, with securing the financing of all what is necessary to build up what is necessary. For example, first of all, the capacity to organize their defense. Let's say up to now, I think only up to next year, it's more or less secured. But in the midterm, I think the budget will not be enough to live up to the challenge we are confronted with. Therefore, it will be very interesting to see how these two countries in France, let's say what you said, problems concerning the political climate and to secure the budgetary means, but in Germany, above all, the budgetary means. The Minister of Defense, he has enormous difficulties to get realized what we were aiming at. And the other question is that, with another point of view, how would you think about the German-Franco relationship concerning the nominations for the commissioners? There's a lot of criticism inside our, what is the defense community, that the French are very much interested in occupying certain posts in order to make sure that their armaments industry gets the most of it.
Thank you very much.
Therefore, there are clashes between the Germans and the French.
Thank you very much for that. Two questions really. Who wants to start? Maybe Gesine?
Yeah, I'm happy to kick us off with the question on this thing, like, do Europeans need to do more on defense and how can this be done and all that? So I would say that I fully agree. Like the thing that, or this idea that Europeans could, even by the end of the war, maybe finish doing efforts in defense and all that, doesn't really hold. So I think regardless of what happens in Ukraine, it is absolutely critical for Europeans to step up their capability, not at least because European security at the moment is de facto still dependent on the United States. And in light of the changing strategic priorities of the United States, which are looking more and more to the Indo-Pacific, Europeans have to do more. Yes, of course, there are problems on the French side, there are problems on the German side. And I think although member states have to get individually their defense spending right, they have to beef it up and they have to keep it constantly on a high level. It is also extremely important not to think about, let's say, 2026 or 2027, when we are looking at really these, a bit at the numbers of defense spending. But I think it is also very important to think about 2035. And then we are talking about things like joint procurement. We are thinking about standardization. We are thinking about bringing European militaries closer together. And for that, it is absolutely crucial for the European Commission to play a stronger role. We already see that there are initiatives going on. We see that there is a defense industrial strategy. And also with the European strategic compass, there are a few instruments, as for example, the rapid deployment capacity, that I think are very promising steps to really making European defense more European. But now it's really up to the member states to also implement that. And when they're, for example, debating the budgets, which brings us back to an issue that we just discussed earlier, also make sure that money is allocated to European projects and not only to national projects.
Thanks so much. Jakob?
Yes, maybe, I mean, quickly on the point that France lacks the capabilities to do everything at once on its own, I would absolutely agree. I think that an increasing number of people, politicians, but also military officers in France are realizing this and acting according to it as well. I think there's a generational shift in France taking place in the political system, with younger MPs who are much more open to transatlanticism, towards NATO. I mean, with very simple observations, but many more people who are English speaking and willing to engage in English with Americans, but also with Germans. I think that Macron's Bratislava agenda reflects this. The fact that Macron has been a very vocal supporter of Ukraine joining NATO reflects this. This new French concept of strategic solidarity that should be strengthened on NATO's eastern flank is also a good indicator. I also think that the fact that France is reducing troop levels on the African continent, I mean, it's forced to do so, yes, but and many people in Paris say the two processes are not connected at all. We want to be present everywhere, but I think there's still a good evidence that France is indeed strengthening its responsibility and presence on the European continent and is reducing it on the African continent, say. Yes, I think it's in that regard, it's a very promising moment, just because Germany has opened this huge process of Zeitenwende, which is ongoing, but because there's a lot of change in France as well. The only question being if this is only Macron and his political weight and resources and the fact that he's a very young and pro-European president who opened this space, and if it will close again after Macron leaves the Élysée, or if this is indeed a larger, again, generational shift, and if a new generation of French politicians are willing to maybe not abandon Gaullism and the traditional strategic outlook in France, but to modernize it and make it more European and make it more compatible with transatlanticism, with NATO, and to really build this concept of European pillar within NATO, to Europeanize NATO. But I mean, again, I'm frankly pretty optimistic on this point.
Thank you very much. And you've got de Gaulle watching over your shoulder, if I see correctly in your bookcase. Since there's no other hand up, maybe we talk about the finance question for a moment, which Hans-Joachim Schmidt also brought up. There's a huge difference between the French position and the German position. German Chancellor, even though as finance minister he has spoken about the Hamiltonian moment, which we apparently saw a couple of years ago, but no follow-up, a complete exclusion of any defense bonds, which have been discussed and been pushed by Paris. On the other hand, we have a French government which will struggle, as you say, sort of to pass a budget which resembles the kind of European budgetary requirements, especially if the left gets its way with lots of spending, which is not yet budgeted for. Is this another sort of big fight we see, or do you see any way out of it? What I heard from Brussels recently is that if we think this kind of sort of groups going forward in terms of European integration, why shouldn't the others leave Germany behind and go ahead with sort of common funding when Germany is not willing? Is this something which you see also in the Franco-German debate? Who wants to go first? Gesine?
Yeah, I can. So I think on this question of financing and maybe like, should we do differentiated integration for financing? I mean, technically one could probably do it, but from a very pragmatic perspective, I would say that there are areas where differentiated integration also from, let's say, a constitutional perspective makes sense. And one of these, for example, in my opinion, is this question of rapid deployment forces, because a French president can snap his fingers and in 48 hours, French troops are somewhere on the ground. It's not how it works in Germany. So that, for example, from a constitutional perspective makes sense, I would say. When it comes to the finance issue, particularly for defense funding, I mean, Germany has quite a capable defense industry, and it's just a financial heavyweight in the European Union. And leaving one or the heavyweight in terms of economic performance behind when you're addressing such a fundamental question like the future of the European defense industry, for me, does not really sound like a good strategy, to be honest. Simply because not only because of the loss of material resources and so on, but also simply when it comes to kind of shaping decisions for the future, it would be very odd to have the member state that has pledged to become the most capable army and will also need to step up its capabilities, to have that country out of the picture. So I would say this year is definitely not a case where we can do it. But how is it going to be working out in terms of finances? I'm really not sure. So I'm not sure whether at one point Scholz will say, okay, let's do the Eurobonds again for defense. I don't see that happen right now. Do I think it would be the good thing to do? Yes, absolutely. Because Europe is just facing a massive strategic challenge, and the COVID pandemic and like the energy crisis have shown that there are ways to address that in a European way. But as long as Germany is blocking that, this is not going to move forward.
Thank you very much. And before we move to Jakob, last question last chance actually to put a question to the panel. So you may think it over, but otherwise we close in a moment. Jakob, your thoughts on the finance question, and yeah, leave it that, and then I have a final question for you too.
Well, I mean, on the common spending, EU budget, Eurobonds discussion, that's one of the points where I think that interior politics might really reduce the room for maneuver for Macron, because if you have a left-leaning government, say in September, you have budget discussions in France, you have financial markets who are getting nervous. I mean, the chances of Germany then embarking on common borrowing on a European level are very slim. And if you add to that you have discussions in France at the moment to go back on some of the reforms that Macron successfully implemented with regards to the labor market, pensioners' age. I mean, if you, how do you sell as a German politician to the German public that we are now borrowing common budgets on a European level when French pensioners go into retirement at 60, and in Germany you have a discussion about going into retirement at 67? I mean, I don't see this being a winning strategy in a year of election next year in Germany. So I think this budget question, frankly, is maybe a good example that brings us back to the beginning of our discussion, and the question on what points Macron will be hindered due to this very difficult and chaotic situation potentially in France, just because he will lose credibility on the European level if they keep spending, I don't know, more than 5.5% deficit per year, if they can't curb down national spending in France, if the European Commission continues with this infringement procedure. Then in this case, I have difficulties seeing that Macron and the Italian position that was written down in the Draghi report, in the Enrico Letta report, will actually gain traction on the European level with the new Commission.
Thank you very much. And to close up, there, Ulrike Kunert kindly has sort of put a question also, which I read out to you. It's basically about whether the Olympic spirit has sort of led to a different kind of mood in Paris, also in politics, whether people are sort of have more of a feeling of togetherness rather than opposition, and is this constant kind of fighting each other. I would like to extend that sort of how could we get the Franco-German relationship into a better mood? Is there some kind of, I don't know, one big nice project? I think there were attempts to marry the Olympics with a European Championship in football that didn't really work out. But do you have an idea, sort of, what could be a kind of flagship thing which just lifts the mood a little, as the political analysis that I think we have worked make quite clear in the past 45 minutes that is there's not much scope really to do much. So maybe Gesine and then Jakob has the last word.
I think Jakob has a bit of a different perspective on that than I have, because I just came back on the very last day of the Olympics and was one of the persons who, in fact, were not here in between. So I think Jakob has a few insights on how it actually was. How has the mood politically changed? I think politically now, well, it was really kind of, I would say, a political ceasefire at that point at the moment. Because basically there were no real negotiations going on the government. The idea was really to get the games done and also to depict a good picture of France abroad. And I would say after all the images that were generated by the opening ceremony, that were also generated by the games and by the enthusiasm that I think the games sparked when you were just following a bit the debate on social media and on TV and so on. I think that France has really managed to do that. Now, I mean, August is always a special time in French politics because it is extremely quiet and everyone is collectively on vacation, and then everyone is coming back in early September to basically go into a collective burnout because people have to catch up with lots of emails and lots of work. And that's also a bit what I'm expecting here to happen after the weekend when everyone is going in the negotiations for government. So I'm not sure whether the Olympic spirit endures in politics. What can we do to rise the Franco-German mood? I think the problem is that Franco-German cooperation, at least on the highest level, has often depended on how well leaders get along. And I think that we have also seen that Macron and Scholz, personality-wise, Jakob already mentioned that, do not get along well. So I think I personally really hope that we will see good dynamics again on the level of the ministers of foreign affairs and ministries of defense, because that is something that we saw under the last government with Annalena Baerbock and Stéphane Séjourné getting along very well. We also saw, for example, a Franco-German co-organized humanitarian conference on Sudan, which I think was a really good success. And I think building on this kind of initiatives is really, really important. So maybe not try to get the big Franco-German op-ed or the big Franco-German declaration, but really focus on things that matter for both of them and also matter beyond France and Germany.
Thank you very much. And Jakob last.
Yes, I mean, very rapidly on this Olympic sentiment, I think that, I mean, at the risk of falling into all of the cliches, but I think it was typically French how people perceive the Olympic Games. I knew nobody in Paris who didn't think that it would be a catastrophe and it would be super bad for France's image. It would be chaos. And then once the opening ceremony was passed and it was internationally celebrated and you had the first images of the game starting, people were suddenly super proud and very patriotic about the Olympic Games. So I think it did France good. I think that it also showed that a Western country, I mean, after the Games in Great Britain in 2012, could organize this well, peacefully. I think there's huge relief in France that there was no major terrorist attack or incident apart from the sabotage acts at the very beginning of the Games. And so, yes, I mean, I hope that this will endure for a little and that it will maybe help with the early September burnout that Gesine mentioned that will start soon. On Franco-German relations, just one sentence. I would say that France and Germany should do everything to give the impression or strengthen the trust of European voters, be they French or German, that they do not depend or depend to a lesser degree on a couple of thousands US voters in swing states in early November, because I think that's a fatal impression for the European project and the European Union, that basically, even though we spend so much money, we depend on people in Ohio, in whatever other state who will vote in the US presidential elections. That would be my hope.
Thank you very much. And with that, and a special thank you to my events colleagues, Laima and Migle, who have sort of set up this meeting technically and helped us through it. I'd like to thank you all for joining this afternoon for the third IPQ debate. Please join me in thanking our two panelists, Gesine Weber and Jakob Ross. And with that, a very good afternoon and see you next time. Bye-bye.